Anyone can describe their job title, but skilled communicators know that stopping there is a missed opportunity. They turn simple introductions into small storytelling moments that people actually remember. So grab your cup of tea and let's talk about your personal brand one-liner. If you are building your personal brand for your business or for your career, either online or in person or both, then I imagine that you have faced that moment where you have to describe what you do. And you don't want to just describe your job title. You want to describe what you do, how you do it, and how it adds value, but in the most succinct way possible. This is something that I imagine most professionals or entrepreneurs have faced at some point. Whether you are trying to write the copy for your website or your LinkedIn profile, or you are trying to write the introduction for a presentation that you are giving, how do you actually explain the value that you offer beyond just your job title? And fortunately, because this is something that can be quite tricky to do well, and it can lead us down this rabbit hole of all of the things that we want to say, but we're not sure how to say it. People that are really good at communicating and really skilled storytellers have established frameworks and formulas that can help you to communicate your value more clearly. So you don't have to completely reinvent the wheel. And I know now that so many people would likely be turning to things like ChatGPT to do a lot of their writing for them, or to write their introductions to their presentations, or whatever it is that they are trying to communicate. But as I've talked about on this channel before, even if you are using ChatGPT, which I don't see an issue in doing, the results that it gives you are only going to be as good as the inputs that you are providing into it. So garbage in, garbage out. So if you know what to include in your prompts, or you know what to tell ChatGPT, or you understand a simple storytelling framework in general, then it is going to make it easier for you to understand what it is that you're communicating, either when you are producing communications for yourself, for your career, or for your business, or when you are asking a platform like ChatGPT to be able to assist you in your writing. So let's dive into how to get to your personal brand one-liner. So before you get to your personal brand one-liner, I recommend that you start with your guide story. So let's start there before we move into the one-liner. And this is something that I've talked about on this channel before when I've talked about storytelling frameworks that help you to tell better stories, or storytelling frameworks that actually sell. I've gone into a lot more detail in those episodes about storytelling in general. But one of my favorite go-to formulas, which I love to talk about on this channel because I use this all the time, and when I first learned it, it was so game changing for me. I've worked in marketing, communications, and branding for 15 years. I am well accustomed to writing and communicating. But if I had known this formula earlier, it would have made all of that writing that I was doing so much easier for me, because I would have fully understood the questions that I should have been asking myself, which would have made the writing so much easier. Instead of trying to come up with it as I go, I would have had a formula almost ready to go. So the formula that I absolutely love is Donald Miller's StoryBrand framework. This is something that he shares in his book, Building a Story Brand. And this is a 7-part framework. And essentially it highlights that there is a character. Now keep in mind that the character is your audience. It's not you. The hero in the story is your audience. They have a problem. They then meet a guide. That is where you come in, and you have authority and you have empathy. But you're not just a guide, you're a guide with a plan. You call them to action, And this helps them to avoid failure and it ends in success. Now, this is something that I also talked about recently in my episode about how to write a less boring LinkedIn bio. Because when you have that framework in mind, you understand who you are communicating to, why you are communicating to them, what value they will get out of that communication, and the transformation state that you are trying to communicate to them as well. So, what I love about this framework is that it positions you to set your audience up as a hero on a mission and for you to be that guide in the story. And that is what I mean about making sure that before you get to your personal brand one-liner, that you understand that you are the guide in the story and you are communicating from that perspective to your audience. So you are the perfect person to solve a particular problem. Because in personal branding or business, you should always be asking yourself, what is the problem that I solve? Who do I solve it for? And how do I solve it for them? And the brilliance of the StoryBrand framework is that it positions you to be able to understand that better before you actually start to prepare any of your communications. But when you do go through that formula, you'll obviously notice that there is a little bit involved in all of those different sections. So you can, if you spend the time doing this, get this down to a really succinct description of what you do for your bios, for say your website or your LinkedIn profile or your introductions to your presentations. But because for the purpose of this episode, we really want to get this down to a one-liner for your personal brand. Let's talk about how we can do that. And fortunately, Donald Miller had thought about this in advance as well. And he also highlights this idea of a StoryBrand one-liner. So this is essentially how you can answer the question, what do you do? It's how you can capture attention quickly without just communicating your title in the generic way that a lot of people would normally do. And so essentially there are 3 key elements that you can distill this formula down to. So that is the problem. What is the problem your audience or customer faces? What is the solution? That is the next component. So, for example, what is the product or the service that you offer that solves that problem that you have identified? And what is the success? So, what is the transformation state? And another way that you can think about this is that if this is a hero's journey, this is almost that happily ever after. So, what happens at the end of the story? What is that promised land? What is that transformation state that you are guiding your audience or your customer towards? What is that state that they are hoping to experience? Now, the way that Donald Miller communicates this is that this can essentially then be distilled down into a few key sentences for your personal brand. So you can get this to be super succinct as well. But because we want a literal one-liner, let's take a look at some examples of how you can do that too. So, for example, you might say, I'm a HR manager building high performing teams so people and organizations thrive. You might say, I'm a safety specialist fostering safety first cultures so everyone returns home safely every day. Or you might say, I'm a marketing consultant helping brands communicate clearly their value and attract the right customers. You could say, I'm a graphic designer helping brands communicate their message through a strong visual identity. Or you might say, I'm a fashion stylist helping men and women express themselves from the inside out with confidence and a signature style. So, as you might notice with all of those examples that I have just provided, is that in this case, sometimes the problem can also be implicit. So, in a lot of copywriting, the problems will be stated to really emphasize what that is, to really reiterate that point, to amplify that pain point. But sometimes this can be tricky when you are trying to distill this down into a one-liner. But what you'll notice with these examples is that the solutions that are presented still implicitly address that problem. So, for example, if we are talking about high performing teams from the HR perspective, then implicit in that is that there might potentially be circumstances of poor performing teams. Or if we're looking at the safety specialist example and fostering safety first cultures, there might be the current circumstance that there are poor safety standards or that it is a higher risk environment. Or if we're talking about marketing consultants helping brands to communicate clearly to attract their customers, then the problem there might be low product or service sales that you are trying to assist with. Or if we're talking about the graphic designer helping brands to communicate their message and having a strong visual identity, the problem there might be that a brand or a personal brand might lack a memorable signature style. Or if we're talking about the fashion stylist who is helping people to express themselves from the inside out, this implies that there might be an element of a lack of confidence there, as well as wanting to have this signature style and potentially having some confusion around what their signature style or their sense of style is. So the problems are being addressed through the solutions, through the transformational state. So it can seem really simple when you see it as this really succinct one-liner, but it's really important that you understand why every word is in what you have chosen to communicate. Because as Albert Einstein said, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. So make sure you clearly understand the value that you have to offer. Thanks so much. Subscribe for more on all things personal branding. I'll see you in the next episode.